Good evening, everyone. It is now 7 p.m. where I am, and it's, well, 6 p.m. or some other time where you are, but thanks all for being here. We are back with the dream team. As Mal always says, we're a great team except for me. So I just kidding. So guys, we're back. Odin is going to be speaking about the Jerusalem thesis. Are the references in the Quran extensively about, or shall we say, are they a rewrite of Mecca? And sorry, no. Are the rewrites of in the Quran of Mecca, are they really about Jerusalem? And I think there's a lot of compelling evidence. This was a very novel thesis, what, 3 years ago, Mal, when it was first introduced, but now I think
Yeah,
it's gained a lot of steam.
it's a lot. There's a lot more. There are a lot more scholars that are coming out of the woodwork supporting the Jerusalem thesis. It's kind of. It was almost like their guilty pleasure. They were kind of keeping it hush hush for the last 20 years, but it seems to have
Uh,
come out of the woodwork now.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're doing the work that the scholars are neglecting to do, or for whatever reasons, be it for not to interfere with the university's reputation or interrupt the flow of money that comes in as grants or something, or they don't want to be attacked in the parking lot by peaceful people, etc., etc. But I think we are hopefully starting to force the conversation into the public eye. And of course, I'm
Um,
joined with Odon, Mal, and Jay Coleman Kane. Although Scully and Mulder sent their apologies, they would love to be here with us, but next week. So, guys, over to you.
I agree. It's something. There is something very odd in this Jerusalem thesis because most scholars are aware of it. It's been more than 20 years, for example, than
Really?
when Gales published his thesis. I think it was one of the first, maybe the first one to identify Mecca, the reference to Mecca in the Quran to Jerusalem. And since the maybe 10 years, a bit more, there have been more and more research. We have to give kudos or credits to Paul Ellis, who did
Right.
almost the same research as Gales on his own, and came with a very nice paper, the Jerusalem thesis. I don't remember
Yeah,
the exact name. It's
yeah,
Paul D. Ellis or Paul
yeah.
D.A.
Mhm.
Ellis.
You know,
It's
Right.
that all started because he put a really long comment under one of the videos that I had done. And I said,
Mhm.
God, you need to come on and explain this because this sounds very compelling. Just in that one comment, and then it just snowballed from there. So
Yeah, there also has been a paper from Stephen Shoemaker in an INARA conference. Thunderous one. Come on. It all stays in the family. It's okay.
We'll talk about tell you what, Thunders. Let's talk on Sunday.
And Shoemaker published a paper in an INARA I think it's the last, or maybe the one before the last INARA book, or about Jerusalem in the Quran. But there is something very odd with this paper because he proved that the Hajj and the objective of the believers was Jerusalem and not Mecca, but
Mhm.
he does not build on it. His conclusion is very awkward. He states that it's strange that Muhammad was sort of very focused on Jerusalem from Mecca. There is nothing in Mecca that would have appealed to him. But anyhow, let's take it as it is,
Mhm.
and let's not draw conclusions, and let's not assert that the Quran is not what we think it is, and that
Mhm.
the Islamic narrative is wrong. Very,
Would it
very
be?
strange.
I'd like to, if I may, I'd like to respond to that comment that
Sure. I'll put it
DQS
back up.
channel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Problem I have is Quran never mentions Jerusalem and Mecca only once. I just to test that. Okay, where am I? I can see the Eiffel Tower right beside me. is the saying, have I mentioned Paris? But I'm talking about Paris. It's the same idea. We don't actually have to have a direct hit. Jerusalem doesn't have to be directly mentioned for it to be all about Jerusalem. Sometimes
Mhm.
so obvious to the people that are sharing material, they don't even have to mention the place. But all the references are.
Well, the Quran assumes that people know all the references, so it doesn't
Yeah,
bother to explain.
yeah,
And then would it be fair to say that there is no evidence that Mecca was an established city in the 7th or 8th century even? So therefore it could not be that city. It had to be somewhere else. And there's lots of references that, sure, there are certain references that you could link to Petra, potentially. I believe, as I've spoken about extensively, there are references you can certainly link to Yemen, because there's so many references to Yemen, especially to Al-Mahabisha, that little particular, no, which is a reference to Ethiopia, but is within within Yemen, close to the border. And then, of course, there's so many things that are parallels to Jerusalem. Like Bakka, which is a reference to just outside Jerusalem in Psalm 80 or Psalm 84. So there's lots of things, and there's no evidence for Mecca.
Yeah. Shoemaker's paper, exact reference, is the Quran's Holy House, and he also published it in this book, The Quest for the Historical Muhammad, along other studies on formative Islam.
And it's interesting, though. It says that, say, Abraham built a house in Mecca, but we could ask ourselves, was it the 3-bedroom house with a jacuzzi? Was it for Airbnb? Right? It's fair because it doesn't say temple.
That's one of the things we'll discuss tonight. The word bait. What does it mean exactly? Of course, it means house, but it also means temple. There is no word in Arabic or Aramaic or Hebrew or any Semitic language to specifically refer to temple. It's always bait, or bait in Hebrew or bait in Aramaic.
yeah. The thing is, if say you use the word house, okay, what would you call a house where a king lives? You would probably say it's a palace.
Correct.
And if you say, well, what is the sort of house where God lives? You'd probably say something like a temple. So it depends contextually on what is meant by house, and so therefore you need additional adjectives, descriptions to specify what is meant.
No. But then what archaeological evidence, what documentation from surrounding cultures show that Abraham in 2000 BC was in the Hijaz? Is there anything to corroborate any of these claims? And you can ask question after question like that, and you'll come up blank.
Yeah.
So, Odon,
I think just to add something, I think the whole narrative is, as with everything else in Islam, copy pasted, because they didn't need to do all of the things that they have done in their narrative when they're creating their stories, saying that all of the prophets were buried in Mecca and everything was in Mecca, everything was in Mecca. They didn't need to do any of that. They could have said, everything was Jerusalem, but now we had a new prophet, and God said, this is actually a very important place because it is where Adam was sent down. That's it. You don't have to really do anything else apart from that. But it looks like they simply just were desperate to create a Muhammad, and they put stories from all sorts, and the same with the city. They didn't have one, and instead of just saying, well, the city was not important before, but it is now because God said so, they simply just borrowed, or in inverted commas, borrowed from all of the other sources. And now you guys are unpacking all of that and saying, nope, that was never Mecca. So they made one of these mistakes, which they have done throughout the narrative, which is, instead of drawing the line on everything that had happened before and saying, well, but now God has told us something new, instead of that, they've tried to reinvent a history that goes back thousands of years, and they don't have one. So looking forward to seeing all of those little things that they have borrowed from Jerusalem, and they said, no, it was Mecca all along. So really looking forward to next autumn.
Yeah, true. DQS says, and he's also very well versed in these things. And I'm, Dr. K, I mentioned you to the guys before, and we can set something up as well. And hopefully we can continue this conversation and more on Mal's channel to get you guys over to Mal and subscribe there and get to know him. And then we'll go over to Odon's English channel as well in the near future, take the show there because, we need to pass the goodness around. But the Bible lists Jerusalem 767 times. And that's true. And the Quran is very vague. I mean, I'm doing a series week by week now with Usama Dakdok, who wrote his own Quran, and the Quran is incredibly vague. I mean, it says nothing.
Well, it's interesting. Back is mentioned only once in the Quran, but it's also, and people don't point this out, the only other place that it's mentioned is the Psalms. It's only mentioned once in the Bible.
Yeah.
So you have that kind of parallel. The other thing is, I have a regular guest on my channel who's called The Linguist, and he's pointed out there is a word in Ugaritic which is used broadly for a temple. Okay, and there's it can mean sanctuary, it can mean a tent where you could use for a religious ceremony. But the word is koresh. You may recognize that word, koresh. So there is a surah which is talking about the koresh and the people traveling there in summertime and wintertime, which sounds very similar to the pilgrimages to Jerusalem. So there's a lot like that. And also the Psalms, if you look at I forgot which Psalm Baka is in. It's, can't remember, is it 80 something? But it's all about pilgrimage to Jerusalem, if you look at it in context. So for the Quran to mention Baka, knowing that the entire Jewish population in the 7th century, they only know Baka in terms of pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So that should be a big giveaway. What are they talking about? And then just finally, and I don't want to anticipate anything Odin is going to say, but the word Hajjaj, which is the Al-Hajjaj, a Hagag in Hebrew means a pilgrim to Jerusalem. And you have Hag and Hajj as well. These are just borrowed words from the Hebrew as well. Again, a pilgrim. But,
in fact, even in Eastern Europe, they have the prefix Haji in front of various names, and they're a Christian appellation. They're not Islamic. So you'll see Haji Todorova, for instance, and it's one point though before Odin goes on, the term Bakka or Bak, there is one other reference which you can find in southern Arabia, and it's a reference to the Babylonian moon god Shin. It's one of his names, so Bakka is also a reference to him, and this could be also a reference to Bacchus, the Roman god, who was perhaps transmorphed or transformed to become and kind of merged with the Babylonian moon god, but it's one of the names of the Babylonian moon god, so that's the only other place you'll find it, Bakka. So that's a reference to, which is oddly enough became Allah, also known as Allah, and we know who Allah is.
Yeah, there is a paper being published by Robert Kerr that should be out in January or February. I can't really tell you much about it because it's under wraps. But he does go into the word Baka and its meaning. But I don't know how much I can say at this. I better not say too much. But it does tie to Jerusalem very closely.
Egyptian, Roman god, Yemeni, Arabian deity, Babylonian deity, and then so there's some oddities there. So Mel, so Odon, perhaps you want to dive in?
Yeah, just a quick word before to follow up on what JC just said. The story of Mecca was invented, and I think they invented its name because they found a sort of resemblance within the text with a strange expression, Bebatni Mecca, which I think either they didn't understand it or they purportedly deformed the word. Because Mecca had a sort of resonance in the Islamic collective memory. I put it in my book. It's Galley's research on Mecca. He found that there was a place called Abil Beit Mecca in Syria, which is very, very strange because it is very, very close to Mecca, of course. And building from there, he also found that there are numerous occurrences of Mecca in the Bible. It's a biblical name, actually. There are 21 occurrences of the word Mecca, which is a feminine noun. It's a noun of the for example, in Genesis 22:24, it's one of the daughters of one of the concubine of let me check the verse. I'm not on the exact verse here. And Bethuel begat Rebekah, Ages bore Milcah to Nahor, brothers Abraham. Yeah, maybe it was one of Abraham's concubines. So that might have been a sort of connection, maybe. But I think the most relevant point is that they found something in the Quranic text that could refer to a location, Bibatni Mecca in Surah 48. And they built on this to invent the name and invent the whole story. Because the expression Bibatni Mecca seems to be connected with events taking place in a holy city with a sacred mosque and so on. And this gives them fuel, a sort of fuel to build and invent, fabricate the Islamic narrative.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. They do the same thing with other words that appear only once, like Sharia and Caliph. So they have one thing there, and then they say, okay, so based on this, they create everything else. So that actually makes a lot of sense. They created the city because there was something in there that they could say, you see, that's our city. Trust me, bro.
You also have to bear in mind as well that as the people became generationally distanced from the movement that started it all off. So if it was a Jewish Christian movement, let's say, and then finally it became its own faith separate from that, people are going to go off the track in terms of the meaning and the significance of everything. They're going to not necessarily in a malignant way or in a whatever the word is. It's probably an awful lot of it is just pure ignorance rather than being deceitful. I think at least in the initial stages, anyway.
I agree. Once the basis was built, like there was an ancient city named Mecca, they just had to reread the Quran and sort of force the Quran description into their newly invented Mecca. This is, I think, how they did it. And this is also how we can undo it. We sort of reverse engineer the Islamic narrative to thanks to the study of the literal text of the Quran. And this way we can understand how the narrative was built. This is the presentation I did once on your channel, Lloyd. And this way we get to understand how Islam was invented or the process of its creation.
Yeah, I mean, we can apply basic propositional logic to the text of the Quran so that we extract only what's there and don't read into it what's not. And then also the tafsir, for instance, where are these tafsir authors getting all the additional information that is lacking in the Quran itself? Patricia Crone wrote about this, and she says, how come the Sirah, as you go through the centuries, become more and more and more detailed when the Quran is so sparse? Where is this information coming from? And there's no source for it. There's no evidence for it.
I would like to just make another point that's kind of parallel to what you've been saying, is if we ask ourselves, in that whole peninsula, where was the most important place in the 7th century? It's unquestionably, it's Jerusalem, because that was the focus of the Jewish conquest. They were eager to get hold of it at 614. They formed alliance with the Persians, and then they fell out with the Persians. The Jews fell out with the Persians, and then the Arabs formed an alliance later and took Jerusalem in the 630s. So that's on one side, and then the least important place in that century was Mecca, because it was practically just a desert. We don't even have any evidence that there was even a habitation. We're kind of we're being generous by suggesting that it might be a slight chance, but there's nothing on maps or anything like that. So it's like the complete inversion of reality when Muslims suggest Mecca was the most important place, and yet there's no evidence, and yet the opposite is true. That all the history is all about Jerusalem. It's all about conquering Jerusalem, losing Jerusalem, taking it back, and all the drama between the Persians and Byzantines are all centered on that one place. So that's where the drama is.
We do have evidence, for instance, in Saudi Arabia, of numerous cities that have documented historical evidence and other records to prove their existence, but none for Mecca and none for Medina, which is very interesting. We can trace some of these other cities back 2000 BC, but we can't trace back Mecca or Medina to even recent times.
Actually, this is the introduction to my presentation.
Oh, okay.
So let's jump into it. Let's share the screen.
Thank you very much, Moose. Really, really grateful. Sadly, my text function doesn't, chat function doesn't show those super chats. Not the super chats. Doesn't show the. Where's your presentation, Odon? It disappeared again. Doesn't show the super stickers.
Let me reshare it. Maybe, and I should share the exact PowerPoint, not the whole screen.
It's best to share the full screen, to be honest. Otherwise, you might end up showing the wrong thing again, like last time.
All right.
Yeah, I have 2 screens, and I wish I had 3. I wish I had space for 3. There we go.
You see it? Do you see it in full screen also?
Yes.
All right. So I wanted to begin with what we started to discuss. The silent sources. We have absolutely no evidence of Mecca prior to the establishment of a very big Islamic empire, a centralized empire. We have nothing before the 8th century, absolutely nothing. There has been attempts to justify the existence of Mecca by arguing over mentions in like Makoraba by Ptolemy, but all of these claims have been debunked, and we don't have anything. And what's more, even though Western archaeologists are not allowed in Mecca, there has been some huge, but very huge works done by the Saudis when they rebuilt the historical center to accommodate for millions of pilgrims. And there were architects and specialists there who supervised the excavations. And I found an interview from one of the architects who worked there and who said that he found nothing dating from before Islam. So I don't think he was allowed to say he found nothing from before the Abbasids, I guess. But that's pertinent enough to indicate that we have nothing supporting the existence of an ancient Mecca before Islam. And we also have no evidence of the Meccan trade. It was studied by Patricia Crone in Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam, a book from 1985, I guess. And it's when we look at the Mecca situation, there are no local resources, especially water, capable of sustaining the city. So it means that everything had to be brought from outside. So food, fodder for the cattle, building materials, everything, which means that the trade activity had to be very, very profitable in order to to generate huge margins and huge cash, so that they could buy this food, fodder, and so on. And it had to be a very substantial trade, a trade of high value goods like gold or jewelries or maybe perfumes. But such a trade would have left traces in the whole of the Middle East. And we have nothing, absolutely nothing. Besides, it will be very, very odd for any trader to base its activities in Mecca and having clients, wealthy clients, able to build gold or jewels. I don't know, in Egypt or in the Levant. Why?
What is
Why
strange
base?
is,
Yeah.
sorry, what is strange on the left coast, there is extensive evidence of trading and trading routes and trading ports.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, I will develop this later, but there was an ancient trading route, land route, not very far from Mecca, but at the time of the origins of Islam during the 7th century, it had been abandoned and replaced by the sea route in the Red Sea, and all the trade took the sea routes. So there cannot have been a Meccan trade actually, and what's more, the sea route used the African western coast. The boats halted at ports that were located in Africa, on the shores of Africa, and not on the Arabic coast, on the Arab coast.
Can I just jump in with a statistic for you that to further your point? I was just curious, how much does it take to feed a cow per day? So it's 30 kilos of dry fodder or 60 kilos of grass. That's a huge quantity. So you imagine, you do the numbers. If you're trying to support not only a human population but an animal population, how are you going to get all that quantity of food and do the other trade as well? Just ferrying it across the desert, it doesn't make sense. So there's a major problem there. Now, yes, after Jeddah has been set up, yes, you could bring it in from Jeddah, but before there was a Jeddah, you're talking about going over by dry land to get to Mecca over a mountain with thousands of kilos of
but also
hay
there was
per
a
day.
limit of how much water Jeddah could produce and deliver, because I did a security project at Jeddah on their water desalination plant, the purification plant. I designed a security system for that particular plant, and now as a modern city they supply water to Mecca, but how were they doing it before?
Yeah.
Mel, you worked on the water situation in Mecca. You did some presentations on your former Sneakers Corner channel. I remember that.
That's right. Yeah, I started with the question of how much water could you pump out of the Zamzam well per day, because the claim was that it was an infinite amount of water that was down there. But even if it was infinite, you can still only pump out so much water per day, and it wasn't near enough to support even a modest population. But then if you add in the amount of water demanded by animals and so forth, it's just impossible.
And they're supposed to be an agricultural community, don't forget, so they need water for agriculture too.
Yeah.
So the common sense hypothesis would be that there was no Mecca or nothing at all there, but it's difficult for Muslims to acknowledge it. And it's what's very odd also is that many scholars don't want to realize it also.
Yeah.
And there is another thing about the silent sources. According to the Islamic narrative, there supposedly was a very big pagan pilgrimage in Mecca, which attracted thousands of people annually. This also should have left traces. and we have absolutely no trace, no evidence for this pilgrimage, which leaves us with this conclusion that since we have absolutely no evidence before Islam about Mecca, we have to conclude that the first evidence for Mecca are found in the Quran, and then in the Islamic narrative and the Islamic narrative texts that were written after the Quran. So the very first evidence in the Islamic sense of the word for Mecca is the Quran. And this is what gives all its importance to the Jerusalem thesis, because we will see that all those supposedly textual evidence in the Quran do not refer to Mecca, but instead they refer to Jerusalem. And this is what we are going to unravel in this presentation. I also want to, but those are supposed to be known by your audience, to add some precisions about Mecca, but we already talked about it. Mecca's location is absolutely unsuitable for an ancient city, so because it has no local resources, no water, no fishing. Jeddah's port is too far away to provide for Mecca. It has no forest, so no lumber, and no mines, so no other resources. And so it is entirely reliant on external supplies. And for those supplies to be brought in Mecca, to be supplied, one would need a centralized power. You see, in the kind of political structure of ancient Arabia, as the Islamic narrative tells us about, there was supposed to be tribes that were fighting each other. So there was no centralized power that was able to supply for Mecca, which gives us a clue as to when Mecca was developed as a city. It was connected to the development of the caliphate. The caliphate had to be big enough, rich enough to supply for Mecca in order for Mecca to be built and for people to live there. For example, the caliphate had to build aqueducts to bring water to Mecca. It was a huge work, a very expensive work. So a treasury was needed with civil servants, workers, and so on, which could not have existed without highly developed centralized power. Also, Mecca was completely unsuitable also as a trade hub, because at first there was no water or vegetation for camel breeding. Let's remind the audience that camels, they might be desert-dwelling beasts, but they need to drink and to eat. Maybe they can survive very long without drinking or eating, but they actually need to drink and to eat. And so they need vegetation. Maybe not as much as cows, but they need water, they need vegetation, and there is no water or vegetation to support camel breeding. And so when you are a trader using camels, you have to choose a base where you can find water and vegetation for your camels. But there is no water or vegetation in Mecca. Besides, Mecca is in a very inconvenient location for trade. It is 60 miles away from the traditional trade route, which goes through Taif. And moreover, there is a vertical drop of 5,000 plus feet. So something like I think it's 1,200 or 300 meters between Mecca and Taif. So every time you want to join to reach the trade route, you have to climb 1,000 meters. And when you come back from your trading activities, you have to climb down 1,000 meters to get to Mecca. It's a perfectly inconvenient location. And what we already said, this land route that was a bit far from Mecca had already been replaced by the Red Sea trade route in the 7th century. So Mecca was completely unsuitable as a trade hub or as a rear base for trading activities. We also have a very contradictory narrative about Mecca in the Islamic narrative, since the Islamic narrative identifies the audience of Muhammad in the Quran as being Meccans living in Mecca. But the Quran describes these people, the audience, so the pagans of Mecca, as being farmers and fishermen. So they cultivate olives, wheat, vines, dates, pomegranates, and so on. And they have cows, sheep, goats, camels, and so. And they are also fishermen, since they fish and eat the fresh product of their fishing, which they take out of fresh water, both fresh water and seawater. The Quran speaks about 2 seas, one of seawater, one of fresh water. There is no freshwater lake in Mecca or in the vicinity of Mecca. You have to go to the Levant, to Syria, to Palestine, to find such lakes. There are some also in Mesopotamia, but I'm not sure whether they existed in the 7th century, since I think most of them are artificial lakes that were built that were created in the 20th century. And so there is something impossible here. The Islamic narrative describes an impossible situation. There cannot have been farmers and fishermen in Mecca. It also tells us that Mecca was pagan, and it sort of should Mecca have remained pagan, it would have been an island, a pagan island, in a huge Christian ocean, which seems also very improbable. And lastly, the description of Mecca within the Islamic narrative. Let's take Ibn Kathir writings. He talks about a city of at least 20,000 people. He comes to this number by just imagining that the city was capable of arming a very strong army against Muhammad. As per the Islamic narrative, in the Islamic narrative, Muhammad faces the armies of Mecca, and there are thousands of soldiers, at least 1,000 riders. So the city of Mecca was capable of arming such an army. So it must have been, according to the narrative, quite a big city, 20,000 people at least. Again, it's not possible in Mecca. So the Islamic narrative describes a city that could not have physically existed as Mecca. It describes something else. And this leads us to look for other hypotheses. And especially,
Odon, this is pretty devastating, and it's extremely hard to refute. I mean, it's on the face of it, it utterly undermines the Quranic narrative. Why haven't scholars gone, yeah, that dog doesn't hunt, to put it politely? Why do Islamic scholars, even Western scholars, still run with the narrative when it's based on the evidence? It is clearly not a true narrative.
I'm
convinced, given what you said here. Yeah.
I don't recall whether I talked to you about this already. Our friend Paul Ellis attended an ICSA conference this summer. ICSA is the International Quran Seminary and so on. So it's a conference of scholars studying the Quran. And he found it very interesting. And he wrote a thread on X where he detailed his surprise because he attended something like 30 or 40 conferences and lectures that were all very interesting, but none of the scholars here dared to fertilize their own studies with the studies of other scholars, and they did not dare also to build upon their own discoveries. It's like there was a sort of taboo. They could not fathom to think about that Islam did not originate in Mecca, that Mecca did not exist, and that the things they were discovering in the Quran were real. That there is a taboo. And my explanation for this is that we have many different attitudes among scholars. Some are some sort of corrupted by Muslim money. The state of Qatar, for example, financed and is still financing the Oxford University. Some of them have ideological postures. They don't want to hurt Islam, and for them, Islam must remain legit, even though the narrative is completely flawed. And there is also something much more probable also, is that most scholars don't understand their job as understanding Islam. And for them, they are only here to study bits of the Islamic narrative or bits of the Islamic text. And it's not their job to get the big picture and to understand Islam. This is a job maybe for us. I remember Jay Smith telling me, I think he also told Mel, that when he was Patricia Crone's student in London, he asked her the very same question. Why don't you publish all what you know? Why don't you say what you believe actually happened? Why don't you publish that Islam is completely false? And she told him that it was not a job, but that it might be Jay's job, so our job. So maybe that answers your question, Lloyd.
Can I jump in?
Of course.
Just for a comparison, Ibn Kathir suggests that Mecca had a population of 20,000 during Muhammad's time. I just had a look at statistics for the population of Rome in 622, 50,000. Does it seem likely that Rome had 50,000 and Mecca had 20,000 at the same time?
It's a very good comparison. Yeah,
Lloyd, you're muted.
One could also say that 20,000 people need at least, I don't know, maybe 200,000 liters of water per day, plus the water for the animals, and it's completely impossible with the Zamzam well.
Absolutely.
They need.
Still muted. Lloyd is still muted.
Mm-hmm.
Don't know why.
So Now that we are almost sure that the description in the Quran and in the Islamic narrative do not refer to Mecca. Let's look at them and see whether they could also refer to Jerusalem or maybe other places.
Say if they had all these descriptions in a book, right? Just imagine this for a bit of what you call thought experiment. So they had all this description of this location in a book, and they had written Jerusalem on the outside. And then they decide, okay, we're going to move everything to Mecca. All they have to do is they smudge out Jerusalem, write Mecca. Now they'll be stuck with having all of this description that was for Jerusalem, and now they're going to try and propose that this was to do with Mecca. And that's what you kind of have. You have material that doesn't
testing.
You're back.
Yeah, something happened with my driver. So if Muhammad was a composite, and we sort of agree that he seems to be made up of a number of different figures, there might be one primary figure, but there's this number of figures that seem to be drawn into this composite. Could it be that Mecca is also a composite, primarily maybe based on Jerusalem to capture that narrative, but also there are elements of other places?
Yeah, I'd say it's a good guess. Doesn't have to be solely, and they may have added bits to brush the sand behind Jerusalem, as it were. Like the Lone Ranger, he tied a tree branch behind his horse to hide his tracks. So you would have to throw in a few details to make sure it isn't completely obvious that it's Jerusalem.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Odon, you've already destroyed Mecca. Just this. You have destroyed the myth of Mecca right there.
But you see, many scholars and almost all Muslims are not convinced by this, because they always say that the absence of evidence is not a proof of absence. But with the Jerusalem thesis, we have something that is much more compelling than an absence of evidence. We have evidence that the descriptions supposedly referring to Mecca actually refer to Jerusalem. And because of this, the whole Meccan narrative cannot stand. Because it's not about a question of absence of evidence. It's a question of evidence against evidence. Without evidence, you can prove everything. I don't have evidence about the existence of, aliens. So maybe they exist.
You know what you could do? Sorry.
Yeah, go on, Mel.
You know what you could do? You could extract all the descriptions that the Islamic tradition give it to a geographer and say, okay, we're not telling you what this place is, but give us your best guess in what sort of climate are we talking about. Well, they're going to look at things like cultivating olives and so forth and vines, and they'll immediately say it's the Mediterranean. Okay?
Yeah.
The problem is Mecca is not in a Mediterranean area. It's too far south.
But we have to reason with science. It's very simple. You just build hypothesis, and you hypothesis, and you compare them. Hypotheses, yeah, exactly, hypothesis, and you compare them, and actually you have two hypotheses when you do the work on the Quran and the Islamic narrative. One hypothesis is that in the 7th century there were two cities that share the exact same characteristic. So they were both the place of Abraham. They were both the mother of cities. For example, they were both the place of the Hajj. They were both the place that the believers wanted to conquer, and many other examples. So there was Jerusalem and Mecca that shared the exact same characteristics. This is one hypothesis, and this is the only hypothesis that can make sense within the Islamic narrative. And there is another hypothesis. It is that the Quran is not about Mecca, absolutely not about Mecca, but it's about Jerusalem mostly, and maybe some other places. But
It's not
mostly
even about Muhammad.
and it's not about Muhammad either. But it's another issue. But they are connected, of course. But it's another topic. Here we are just talking about the geography of Mecca. And when you compare the two hypotheses, you have to conclude that one is much more probable than the other. The Jerusalem hypothesis, the Jerusalem thesis, is I don't know, a million times much more probable than the Meccan thesis.
Right.
And this is the only way to work with this kind of data. This is how science works. Even a Muslim mind can understand that when you compare the two scenarios, the two hypotheses, one is much more probable than the other. And when I say much more probable, I cannot say with the scientific method that I'm 100% sure that Mecca did not exist. I would say that I'm 99.99% sure it did not exist, and it's all about Jerusalem. But that's the things. That's how things works with science. Apart from mathematics, there is no absolute truth in science. It's all a matter of probable hypothesis.
The other thing that is worth pointing out is for Jewish people, the only place that animal sacrifice could occur was on the Temple Mount. And so you have historical references to resumption of animal sacrifice in the early 7th century, and there are references to animal sacrifice in the Quran as well. So if this is to do with any sort of community that's connected to Judaism, which there's plenty of signs of that in the Quran, there's lots of rituals that is clearly Jewish, like not eating pork and so forth. It stands to reason that it's more likely Jerusalem than some place that Jewish people wouldn't even recognize as of any significance.
Mm-hmm.
If I may add something on the storytelling point of view, when you create a story, you can try to fabricate it from scratch, and that is impossible. We don't have that level of creativity. We always actually copy from other things that we have heard before, and we simply just mix things up. So if we thought, is it possible that they simply created everything from scratch? These guys sat down and they started making up stories. It's just absolutely impossible. So then they can either be taking some very, very small bits of information from different places, and then they have to create a whole narrative, or more likely, they have ideas of full stories that have happened in other locations, and then they just change the names, and instead of horses, they say camels, these sort of things. But having the full story, if they had tried to do it just because they knew, they used things. So in our stories, we say there were sacrifices. If they have too many disjointed things, it would have collapsed immediately. So I think the bulk of the story does make sense that, it cannot be Mecca, but it would have to be other big chunk of stories that they would know from start to finish, that they can very easily just change a few names and everything works for them until you guys come along and destroy it, of course.
Yeah, there's another element to take into account. You see, the traditionists who created the Islamic narrative, they couldn't create it from scratch, also because there were collective memories. People kind of remembered that the early believers went to Jerusalem, that there was a temple, that there were high hopes, expectations, and so there were also texts such as the Quranic fragments before they became the Quran that told a story. There were memories, and they could not obliterate or destroy these memories. They had to sort of build on them to build something plausible by distorting the memories. And so, for example, they kept the core of the memory of the rebuilding of the temple, and they change it into, for example, the building of a synagogue by Kab al-Ahbar, Umar's companion. When he went to Jerusalem, he asked Umar the permission to build a synagogue on the Temple Mount. This sort of this was compatible with the collective memory that something was rebuilt on the Temple Mount, but it was a way of it was distorted in order to serve an Islamic purpose. Even though the story of Kab al-Ahbar is ludicrous, because a Jew does not build something on the Temple Mount different from the temple, even the synagogue. So this is how they had to. This is exactly the same way they built the Muhammad character.
Yeah.
Can you zoom in a bit now? Can you just widen the screen to zoom in a tad so that we can actually read it?
Is that
just fill the page? Just fill the width.
Let me just see how I can.
Control plus, or hit the plus sign on top there.
Oh yeah, is that better?
Yeah, much. Yeah, much. I can read it now. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a contemporary piece of evidence. Eliezer bin Kalir wrote around 630 the following in relation to Ben Huziel's building project. Now I'm taking this from A.J. Juice, but this bit down here is the quote: "The holy people will have a short respite. For Assur, the Persians will permit them to found the holy shrine, and they will build the altar and offer up the sacrifices, but they will not have time to establish the sanctuary." Now, this bit, I think, is A.J. Juice inserting a meaning, but after 3 months, the commander-in-chief will return and come against him, which would be Ben Huziel, and will kill him in the little temple, and his blood will congeal upon the rock. Now, the key thing is, it's a reference to the offering up of sacrifices, which occurred in the 630s. A key figure there is Ben Huziel, who there are about 10 Jewish sources from the 620s and 630s who are proclaiming him as the Messiah ben Joseph, which, in normal layman's language is the Messiah. So you have some key elements there that overlap with what the Quran is talking about when it's talking about sacrifices and so forth, so I'll share that.
This text is about the 614 attempt to rebuild the temple, or further attempts?
Yeah, it's the little temple. It's not the way they would have viewed it is the temple had to be built essentially by God. That's how they viewed it. So the little temple was like the best they could offer instead of the real temple. That's the kind of view that they had of it, So it's kind of like a substitute for the temple. And there's different depictions of it actually, even in terms of the there's a mosque in Damascus. Let me just see if I can find it. I'll show it to you. Let me just see if I can very quickly spot it here. I think I have it here. Yeah, let me just. Can I show this again? Share. And can you see that? So this here is the little temple as depicted, if I remember correctly, in the. I think this is from a mosque in Damascus, if I'm not mistaken. But this is a coin from centuries before that. You see, it's been a while since I've had a look at this. See where is what? It's a few centuries before this coin. It's a Jewish coin. I don't know if you can see the similarity between the two, but this seems to be what has been referred to as the little temple. I can't spot it offhand there. There is a dating for it somewhere, but I can't see it. Now there's a reference here to like the curtains there. The veiling of the holy buildings finds its origin in the Jewish religion and not in some obscure pagan rituals. Circumambulation around the foundation stone or the black rock is likewise a common route in Judaism. So this little temple would have allowed the Jews to go around the rock on the Temple Mount. It actually satisfies two things. You can see that it looks like a Kaaba, but it also has a dome on the top. So when you see references to a dome on the Temple Mount, that's all it may be referring to, not the Dome of the Rock as we see it today. So
yeah, on Temple Mount there are several domes actually.
Yeah,
there is the Dome of the Rock, but there are little domes also, and we don't know much about them. The Dome of the Chains, for example, and there are at least one or two small domes. Maybe the origin of these domes was it was a Jewish building, but when you put forth A.J. Deu's article, it was commenting on a sort of delay or permission given by the Persians, and the Persians were defeated in the 630s. So, in my opinion, it seems much more probable that the article refers to the 614 attempt.
Yeah,
where the Persians were active.
Before Islam, domes were part of Byzantine church design.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, of course, yeah. For example, I think the Katisma church had a dome.
There are many photos, drawings from that era. The domes were. So is there a connection? Is there an overlap? One has to ask.
Yeah.
And even the Dome of the Rock is modeled on the Kathisma Church. It's a rebuilding of the Kathisma Church, except a repurposing as well. But, there's a story there that we haven't properly unpacked yet.
Okay, well, just a quick thought. According to the story, they when Islam then conquers Jerusalem, then is when they build stuff, and probably the final build happens, or it is completed during Abdul Malik. If Islam was what their traditions say, and it was 100% according to their traditions, they wouldn't have used those shapes and that dome, because obviously that is they copied everything. Were would they have
You're
done
breaking up. I couldn't hear all of that. Would you mind just saying it again? You're breaking up.
If the standard Islamic narrative was true, which it isn't, they simply repurposed everything. If they wanted to build something in Jerusalem, according to their traditions, instead of using that shape, and they have done like an actual box, an actual Kaaba, what would they have built
Lost
up
you
there?
again.
I seem to get your point nonetheless, JC. I think you're saying that if the believers who conquered Jerusalem were actual Muslims, they wouldn't have built anything resembling a church.
Exactly. It would look like the Kaaba, maybe. A wonderful Kaaba.
But look at this Hagia Sophia, someone mentioned. You've got, interesting. And this is Byzantine, isn't it?
Yeah. And in fact, I was there just a couple of summers ago, and if you go in the main entrance hall, right above you, they've actually preserved the icons that were painted on the wall, and it's an icon of Jesus and so on. So it's pretty much.
Yeah, I was there a long time ago.
JC, I don't know if you're aware of this. We have a description from 670 from a Frankish pilgrim that went to Jerusalem of a square building on the Temple Mount. So not an octagon, yet, but a square building, and a square building on the Temple Mount reminds very much of the Holy of Holies, or at least of the Jewish temple.
And it could fit 3,000 people, he said.
So a big building.
I think actually I read that in a very good book by one Odon Lafontaine. I think that's actually what I read that. So
I think I did some calculations about that. It would have to be the size inside to fit 3,000 people. It would have to be at about 3,000 square meters in size. So it gives you it's much bigger than this little temple. So this was a replacement. But it mentions beams over a foundation as well, which is a bit mysterious, like as if something got destroyed and then it was replaced.
Now, 3,000 meters is 60 meters by 50, so there are plenty of room on the Temple Mount for such a building. All right. So we go back to the Jerusalem thesis.
It's strange that you don't find, what's his name, Reynolds, Side Reynolds. That guy. I mean, when's he going to just openly have that conversation, or Ahmed Al-Jalad, and say bluntly, "Hey guys, here's how it is." Surprised they don't do that.
I think he's trying to be nice. He doesn't want to rock too many boats.
Well, they have the dots. They don't connect them. It's like, it's frustrating.
That's the thing Paul Ellis was saying about the ICSA seminar scholars. They don't connect the dots. Even the most advanced scholar don't connect the dots. Shoemaker does not connect the dots, even though he's very, very close. The only one I've seen connecting the dots is Galez 20 years ago. So he did what with the dots he had in his time. And I try to sort of update his work with what I've been doing with the Great Secret of Islam. But he is the only one I've seen trying to get the big picture and understand what really happened.
Just FYI, this is northern Yemen. This is northern Yemen, Al-Mahabisha. This is the area where Muhammad sent a group to destroy the Kaaba that was in Yemen, the Kaaba of Yemen. You can see this is agricultural land. This is green. So this matches the descriptions as well, even better than Petra does in many ways of what's happening in Yemen. So with the Quran's descriptions, just thought I'd share that.
This is happy Arabia. There's one thing you won't find in Yemen is
lakes,
a freshwater lake.
Yeah, but they had a very strong fishing economy. They were very good sailors. I mean, they were trading well. They were one of the largest empires at the time. So at least that portion fits.
There are other geographical indication in the Quran that tell us that at least some of the preaching could not have happened in Mecca. There is a description about Lot's pillar. Lot, the biblical figure, is described in the Quran, and the Quran talks about. It doesn't talk about his wife becoming a salt statue, but an old woman becoming a salt statue. And the Quran says you walk along this column, this statue. I think in the night or in the morning and the evening, something like this. And this statue, this column, is actually on the shores of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is called Lot's Sea in Arabic, and it's a clue that some of the preaching happened there. Or at least it was some of the Quran was preached to people who were dwelling near the Dead Sea. This also is a bit far from Yemen, but it doesn't imply that there was nothing connecting Yemen to the Quran. But we have many clues
But
pointing to the north.
yeah, can I also point out the fact that that location is significant also because of its apocalyptic warning implied. And so what sort of people would be compelled by an apocalyptic message? Well, a place where there's a ton of wars between all the superpowers, right? You have the Byzantines and the Persians. They're hard at it. You know, one wins, then the other one wins. And of course, if you're living in that time, you think the world is going to end. So if you have someone preaching, they're going to preach an apocalyptic type of message. They think this is it, you know, and they're expecting a Messiah to come to rescue them from all of this hardship and death and all the rest of it, you know. The other thing I should point out is there's a couple of sources that refer to the conquest of Jerusalem, and one of them, unfortunately, I can't remember his name offhand. I'll have to look him up. But it's a monk from the early 7th century who basically gives an account of the conquest of Jerusalem, and it's very harrowing. It talks about hundreds, if not thousands, of Christians being killed, and then the retaliation against the Jews and so forth. And this is a separate account from this Sebius's account.
It's Anastasius from Sinai. It's in his book.
That's the one. That's the one. Yes. Yeah. It's in Shoemaker, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's also in, I think, in Robert Oiland's Seeing Islam as Others Saw It.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, and actually, I think Shoemaker is the one that points out that the apocalyptic theme of the Quran is its second most popular theme after the monotheism.
This one, with this book, The Apocalypse of Empire.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's,
I'm a huge fan.
So he says that monotheism is the number one theme, or the believers, let's say, it's assumed to be monotheism. And then the second one is the apocalypse. I'm of the opinion that the focus on the believers is actually not monotheism, because everyone is a monotheist. It's almost like that's not really that significant for them. It's the believer in the Messiah. I think the Messianic movement is what they have to believe in. They can be Persian, Jewish, Christian. They all think there's a Messiah of some kind coming, because they all have that aspiration. It's a collective aspiration. They want an end to the war. They want peace. They want, you know, a kingdom of prosperity and peace and all the rest of it. So I think that's what they have their shared belief in.
Completely agree. Lloyd, are you okay? There was something odd with your microphone.
Yeah, my cable is too tight and it's yanking but it's fine. I think it's fine. I just got to fix it later.
Okay, so let's go back to the Jerusalem thesis. The thing I intend to do now is to look at, I think, every reference within the Quran that the sin attributes to Mecca. And there are many references, but mostly I think we can pinpoint these references to these 15 items. So the Maqam Ibrahim, Masjid al-Haram, Al-Bayt, Al-Kaaba, Al-Qura, the city of the Hajj and Umrah, the direction of prayer, Mecca, Safa and Marwa, the city that was ruled by polytheists that forbid the Hajj to true believers. So we find this in the Quran and in the Islamic narrative. The city from which the believers were expelled and to which they were barred access afterwards. A city that was the objective to reclaim through combat. A city that was taken peacefully thanks to a treaty. A city whose shrine was built by Abraham and Ishmael, and this bizarre word Arafat as a conclusion. And we won't have time to do all of these tonight. Some of them are a bit tricky, some are very easy to understand. But let's start with the Maqam Ibrahim. In Arabic, it's supposed to refer to the station of Abraham. So a very peculiar place in Mecca, near the Kaaba. There is this golden metal structure. There is a picture here, and inside there are the two footprints of Abraham. This is supposed to be the very place where he stood. So Abraham's standing place, and he stood there. The word Maqam is not. It's not very well translated by the verb to stand, because it's much more than standing. It's standing as if being tried by God. And this is the meaning of the expression Maqam Ibrahim. This is the place where God asked him to sacrifice his son as a sort of trial. And so this is the place of the attempted sacrifice of Ishmael, according to the Islamic narrative. We have some occurrences of the expression, either Maqam Ibrahim or the place where Ibrahim stood. I've put them on the slide. And those occurrences also say that the Maqam Ibrahim, so the station of Abraham, is also the same place as the Beit, the same place as Mecca, and the same place of the Kaaba, and maybe the same place of the Hajj, since in Surah 5, verse 27 here, God instituted the Kaaba, the sacred house, as a place of Qiyaman, a standing place. So it's translated here. It is the Sai International translation. It's translated as a place of gathering, but it's not gathering. It's a place of standing, a place of judgment, actually, for people.
And, it's related to the word musallan.
Yeah? Excuse me?
According to the Encyclopedia of Islam from Brill, it's linked to the word musallan, a place of invocations and supplications as well.
It's a place where God tries people, like in a trial. And this is why it is called the place of gathering, because it is the place of the judgment, of Judgment Day. All nations will be gathered, and they will be standing as in trial before God or before his Messiah. And this is why it is translated as a place of gathering, which also has very strong connections to Jerusalem in the Bible, in the book of Joel, and also I think in Zechariah. There are mentions of Jerusalem being the place where all nations will be gathered at the end of times,
right,
for their judgment. And also we find this in some of the Islamic tradition. There are books about Jerusalem done by Islamic scholars in the 10th or 11th century that talks about Jerusalem as being the place of judgment, of gathering.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I was pointing at this specific verse, so verse 97 of Surah 5, because it talks about the offering. The offering and the offering are animals that are to be sacrificed for the Hajj. So there might be here a connection with the Hajj. It tells us that the Maqam Ibrahim, so the station of Abraham, is the same place as the Beit, as Mecca, as the Kaaba, maybe the same place as the Hajj, and also the place of the judgment of nations.
Yeah, the Encyclopedia of Islam is really unspecific. It's giving like 4 maybe views. You know, it could be this, could be that, could be the other, could be the fourth.
Yeah,
The other
I think
thing,
the Encyclopedia of Islam mostly refers to Islamic tradition to explain the Maqam Ibrahim. Does it refer to the Bible? Because this is what I want to do now.
No, I'd have to look it up and see if it does.
can I jump in with a few thoughts?
Yeah.
So the standing is also significant because that Abraham stands to offer sacrifice, and therefore it's a trial before God, whether it's a trial of his faith. Also the Surah 397, clear signs. There's actually Jewish text from the 630s called the signs of the Messiah. So this is a common motif. They're looking for signs of the messianic age. So I think that's what the Quran is getting at when it's talking about the emphasis on signs all the time. And the other thing is Abraham is kind of like foreshadowing the Messiah as well. So it has I think, a messianic theme to it as well.
Yeah. This is something very interesting. I will develop on this on the item. I don't remember the number, but when Abraham and Ishmael are supposed to have rebuilt the house, the Kaaba, there is something very messianic also here, because the one who builds the temple is the Messiah.
Could this be relevant?
It's Muhammad. Maqam, yeah.
A mace, a hooked iron rod. I don't know if this could be of relevance.
Is the
I mean, the crook of Jesus, the shepherd's crook. I mean, I'm just wondering if this could be.
Isn't the Messiah meant to have an iron rod?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is something about the Messiah and the iron rod. The son of David or something, was it?
Yeah, the son of David will lead the nation with an iron rod.
Yeah, that's it.
But what language is this, Lloyd?
This is from the Quran concordance by Hannah Cassis. Yeah, Arabic. Yeah.
Oh, it is Arabic. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Quran concordance.
So there is a connection between the Arabic and the Hebrew language with this verb kaum, which means to stand.
Yeah, there's another meaning of to stand later, but this one stands alone as hooked iron rod, a mace.
Yeah. If I may just add something, it's probably quite unrelated to this, but just joining some dots. I heard from Lloyd actually that before the time of Islam, some people thought that the footprints of Jesus were on the rock underneath the Dome of the Rock. That became then the footprints of Muhammad. And then somehow you have other footprints of this guy down there in Mecca, with obviously a cast that has diacritical marks. So it was done during the time after Islam was created. So I do wonder whether they knew that it was good money to say, hey, the footprints of Muhammad, they are there. And they thought, let's do the same down here. And they just created that myth. I think maybe something to do with money, maybe.
Yeah. So you have this one here about the book of Revelation. St. John is connecting the iron rod, obviously, with Jesus. So this is definitely a messianic thing. Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
But the supposedly clear signs are to be found actually in the Bible, I think. The biblical tradition also explains the story of Abraham being tested or put to trial by God, asking him to sacrifice his son, but not in Mecca, but in Jerusalem. And the Quran talks about clear signs. In it are clear signs. Where did I put it? So yeah, it's in Surah 3, verse 97. In it are clear signs, the standing place of Abraham. And when we look at the expression clear signs, ayatun bayinatun, in the Quran, we have to understand that the word ayat, means both sign and verse. And so it can the clear signs can also be understood as clear verses. And this is how it is understood in the Quran, in Surah 24, verse 34, Surah 26, verse 2, Surah 27, verse 1, Surah 28, verse 2, where there is the very same expression, ayatun bayinatun, and it is then understood as being clear verses. So where are they clear verses about the standing place of Abraham? Not in the Quran, but we do find them in the Bible. We have some very clear verses about this place in the Bible. In Genesis 22, this is a story of God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, go to the land of Moriah, offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains. And so the place is one of the mountains of the land of Moriah. And the biblical tradition, especially the Jewish tradition, understood this place as being the Temple Mount, where supposedly Abraham built the altar for the sacrifice. And it's interesting to note also that the Samaritans have another tradition about this very same verse. For them, the place of Abraham is not the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It's their own mountain, which is I forgot it, but another place. Lloyd, I'm sure you're such a
I've
good
mentioned on the channel. I've actually
Lloyd.
spoken about that. The Samaritans, how they did their own Bible as well. Yeah, I know what you mean. Mount Gezerim,
for the Jews,
Mount
Gezerim, yeah.
Is it like Mount Gezerim, Mount Gezerit, something like that? I can.
Mount Gezerim. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. Anyhow, for the Jews, they are very clear that the place of Abraham is on the Temple Mount. This is where he built his altar, and this is why Solomon built the temple here. In the second book of Chronicles, chapter 3, verse 1, then Solomon began to build the house, the temple, Beit.
You just made me think, from a narrative. Sorry. And then Saruman built his tower, and the dwarves have their caves in Moria. Think about it.
Yeah, but Tolkien was heavily influenced by the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. But then so were the Quranic writers. If you see the resemblance there.
Saruman, yeah. yeah, there is a connection there.
If you think about the shape of an altar, with the horizontal on the two sides, and think about the letter Beit, which is where the B comes from, you have the same shape. So you have this. There's a very rich symbolism in the concept of the altar, the house, and the letter, and it's all
actually the symbolism for the B letter is the house. So the temple, and within the temple there should be an altar. Yeah. So everything is connected, and so in this verse tells us that the Jews believe that the Jerusalem and its temple were built on Mount Moriah because it was supposed to be the place of Abraham. So the verses here are very clear, and we have to come to the conclusion that the Maqam Ibrahim could also be in Jerusalem. And it's even more probable than it is in Jerusalem than in Mecca, because we have clear verses about the Jerusalem location, whereas we only have the footprints of Abraham as evidence for the Meccan thesis, and it seems quite obvious that these footprints were fabricated.
Yeah, there is no
I don't
evidence.
think such an artifact could have survived thousands of years in Mecca.
No, they need to provide evidence that 2000 BC Abraham was in the Hejaz. I mean, it needs to be, because there's plenty of evidence we can tie the Jews to.
This is their evidence. Don't you see the footprints? This is
Yeah, the Quran says that the Quran is correct.
rock solid evidence. But the thing is Mecca is. I've told about Mecca being a very inconvenient location for trade. There's one thing I haven't told you about, is that Mecca is subject to catastrophic floods. Regularly, there are floods in Mecca because of the situation of the city. The city is surrounded by hills, and when it rains, the water comes from the hills to the center of Mecca, and regularly there are major catastrophic floods. The last very catastrophic one was, I think, in the 40s, in the last century.
Mm.
And if you look at the history of Mecca according to Islamic history, there are records of such catastrophes happening maybe 10 or 15 times during the time from the beginning of Islam up to now, with hundreds, maybe thousands of people drowning in the floods or the mud, and it's another clue that an ancient city could not have been there. It would have been regularly destroyed by the floods, and the footprints of Abraham, even though they are supposed to be rock solid evidence, they could not have survived such floods. So this evidence is it's paper thin in regard of the actual meaning of the text. The ayatun bayinatun are obviously the Bible verses about the place of Abraham, and so the station of Abraham could be in Jerusalem or is in Jerusalem.
Right.
The second item is a big one, the Masjid al-Haram, or Masjid al-Haram. Masjid al-Haram, it is in Jerusalem. Excuse me, there is a bit of a malfunction there, but we have the conclusion before the development. A masjid is not a mosque, actually. It's a derived meaning mosque. A masjid, it comes from the Arabic verb sajada. It means a place where one prostrates. So it's a place of adoration, a place of worship. It's not an Islamic place per se. There have been Christian masjid. The Arab Christians had masjids where they worshipped Christ and performed their Christian religion there. Mm-hmm. And the word haram doesn't mean literally doesn't mean sacred. It means forbidden, unlawful. We had some discussion with Murad about the meaning of haram. Haram meaning halal meaning loose, and haram meaning tight, if I remember well. So haram means actually unlawful or forbidden, and in the right meaning,
that would be like azima and ruksa, strict and dispensation or relaxation. That would be the range of behavior that's acceptable in Islam under the Sharia.
Yeah, that's the thing, tight and loose. Lawful and unlawful, allowed and forbidden. And so something that is forbidden in a derived meaning it becomes sacred because it is forbidden. This is the ancient sense of the word. A taboo is something that is forbidden. It becomes sacred. You cannot enter the Holy of Holies. It is forbidden. Therefore, it is sacred. And so the masjid. Yeah?
Can I just jump in the ancient temple in Jerusalem? They used to have a sign. In fact, I think they found a couple of them, architects or archaeologists found a couple of them, that basically said you're not allowed to enter certain areas under pain of death.
Exactly.
So there was the court of the Gentiles. Okay, if you're Gentile, you could go there, but then court of the women had a specified, basically you had to be Jewish for there, and the court of the Israelites. You know?
Yeah, this is the very peculiar structure of the temple. With it's a house within a house. You have a very big enclosure. Only the Jews can go inside, and there inside there are separations. So the man and the woman can go in the first yard, and only the man can go in the second yard and witness the sacrifices. And then only the priest can go in the third yard, and only the high priest can go in the fourth yard, which is the Holy of Holies, under penalty of death.
And only on a certain day of the year as well. Yeah.
During the Yom Kippur.
Yeah.
He enters the Holy of Holies and he says the name of God.
In fact, the tradition is that the high priest had a rope tied around his waist, because if he had a heart attack or died while he was behind the curtains, they couldn't enter, so that they could drag him out. Okay.
Yeah, and when I think it's the Roman general Titus, when he went to the temple, he wanted to see the Holy of Holies with his own eyes, and he entered the Holies of Holies, and he desecrated the place by entering it. And he told his soldiers that it was empty. God was not there. So he thought. So the Masjid al-Haram literally means the forbidden place of worship. In a derived meaning, it means a sacred place of worship. And according to the Islamic narrative, it refers to the surroundings of the Kaaba in Mecca. So not the Kaaba, it includes the Kaaba, but it's the whole esplanade around the Kaaba in Mecca. When we look at the occurrences of Masjid al-Haram expression in the Quran, it tells us that it is the same place as the place of the Hajj and the Umrah. It is the place of the direction of prayer. It is the place from which the believers were barred access to. And by association with the what we already seen, we can say that it is also the same place as the Maqam Ibrahim, because it is the place of the Hajj. So it's one and the same place. And if we look at it historically, we alluded to it, but the Temple Mount was, for the Jews, a forbidden place of worship, because it was supposed to be the location of God's presence on earth in the Holy of Holies. And after the destruction of the temple, so in the year 70 by the Roman armies, the Jews were unable to locate the exact location of the Holy of Holies. So they did not dare to put a foot on the Temple Mount by fear of entering the Holy of Holies, even though it was destroyed. So the Temple Mount was completely forbidden place of worship. It was a sacred place, of course, but it was also a forbidden place because of this, because of the fact that they didn't know where the Shekinah was.
Can I throw in some evidence that might corroborate your story here? This is from my talk on monotheism, which discusses Yemen a lot. Haram, this is from Encyclopedia of Islam. Among the Bedouin, a sacred area around a shrine, a place where holy power manifests itself, and there's multiple references. And they obviously, this is an assertion, the sacred territory of Mecca, right? And Al-Haramain, that's another term related to that, the two holy places, usually Mecca and Medina, but occasionally Jerusalem and Hebron. Now, isn't that an odd statement to have? It's a very odd statement. Pops out of nowhere. Then it goes on. In Surah 4, 125, Abraham is described as Hanif. It is stated that God took him as a friend. Hence the later designation of Hebron, the alleged burial place of Abraham, as Al-Khalil. Now it talks about, we'll see you soon, Lil Lomain. Thank you very much for being on the chat. My admin has to drive home. So basically now they refer here to Abraham, which is interesting. There's a connection to Abraham. Then it goes on. This is from Snooker Gronier. He's a very, very famous translator. It was not until after the Hijrah, on the occasion of his controversy with the Jews, that Muhammad pronounced the Old Testament patriarch a Hanif and the first Muslim, and maintained that together with Ishmael, the ancestor of the Arabs, they built the Kaaba. So after the argument with the Jews, they then suddenly came up with a new narrative. Abraham was a Muslim, right? Islam, and because they then adopted these places, Islam was able to claim being the religion of pure monotheism, propagated by Abraham. That was a new assertion, only came after a particular historical point, and also priority over both Judaism, founded by Moses, and Christianity, founded by Jesus, because they now monopolized the holy places. And then there's a couple more points. Yes, go on, Mel.
I suppose an important point is Hebron, if I'm not mistaken, is where Abraham sends Hagar and Ishmael out into the desert. So
this is where he's supposed to be buried also.
Yes.
Yeah. And you know, in the Islamic tradition, Hagar goes running around for water, supposedly next to the Kaaba.
Yes.
But yes, we have here, you know, connection with Hebron and Jerusalem. So it's in the orbit of these two places the tradition is coming from.
And it says here, dual form of haram, haramain, meaning the two sanctuaries, traditional Islamic appellation, two holy cities, but also refers to Jerusalem and Hebron, which is really odd. And here, an interesting thing, haram has another meaning, plural, ahram. You can think ajram, think Buddhism, think ashram, exactly. Ahramat, meaning pyramid, preeminently the pyramid of Cheops and Kefren. Now, haram is pyramid. Now, also in the design of these mosques, there's an element which is apparently taken from the design of the Egyptian temples. So this links back. So now you've got a reference to the ancient Egyptian mystery religion, which goes to Egypt. And there's these odd things that just sit there dangling, just daring you to investigate. And everyone dismisses it because, well, that's not the norm, you know, and then just ignore that and move on, you know.
Or it's not ignored, but the thing is, it's very logical. Early Islam was all about Jerusalem, a bit about Abraham. So it seems logical that the holiness of Jerusalem endured within Islam, even though it's hard to explain with an Islamic explanation.
But this pyramid thing is also a bit weird, because then you got to go to the Sufis and the Egyptian mystery religions and all their claims, and it gets weird. So I can see why scholars don't want to deal with it. You know,
I don't think the word ahram refers to the very shape of the pyramid.
No, there's an element there. That's a longer story. But there's an element that gets involved with the architecture. But it carries over.
It also is it okay? Do you see my screen? No. Okay, I think it's good now. It reminds me of something I should have put in the presentation. There is something about the Hiram state that the Muslim pilgrim are supposed to be in when they go to Mecca. Actually, it refers to purification rites that the pilgrims have to do when they go to Jerusalem.
Right.
And there is a connection between Ihram and Aram also. It's a sort of a sacred state. And the Islamic narrative has defined boundaries, a sort of region where you have to be in a Ihram state. You cannot go to Mecca without having purified. And when you look at this boundary, it actually refers to Jerusalem, and it has been transplanted in Mecca, and it does not make sense in Mecca because the boundaries are defined by stones or pillars, and that are supposed to be around Mecca, but kilometers from Mecca. And one of these stone is supposed to be in the Red Sea. So it's another inconsistency of the Islamic narrative.
Mhm.
It forcefully applied to the Meccan location something that was not fit for it.
I mean, you've never heard of the famous Meccan fish plate?
Yeah. Okay. But let me conclude on the sacred mosque, Masjid al-Haram. So the definition sacred mosque or Masjid al-Haram could very well apply to the Temple Mount. So we have seen this for religious reason, but there is also an historical reason for this. In 614, as Mel told us, Jerusalem was conquered by an alliance of Persians, Jews, and maybe some Arab auxiliaries. And so the Jews had a 3-year rules, a 3 years rule over Jerusalem, and thereafter the Persian took over. And I think it's 627. In 627, the Byzantines retook Jerusalem, and then they expelled all the Jews, and all Jews were forbidden to enter Jerusalem afterwards. So,
can I just add something to that, if I may, if it's not diverting you too much? What I've learned recently is everything was going to plan. The Persians and the Jews had an alliance and they conquered Jerusalem. The deal for the Jews was if they supported the Persians, they would get their Holy Land. And the Persians said, yeah, no problem. They were excited about that. But then the Jews messed up because they took revenge on the Christians. And Chiron, who it seems was a Christian, was very outraged when stories emerged that the Jews had attacked the Christians. So that seems to be the cause of the falling out between the Persians and the Jews. Does that kind of make sense? And then the fallout then later between the Jews and Arabs seems to be over control of the temple. It's the Temple Mount. The Jews wanted it for themselves. The Arabs said, no, this is important to us as well because we are following our father Abraham and so forth, and for other reasons. There seems to be two separate, distinct falling outs going on.
Mm-hmm. One also has to bear in mind that the emperor of Persia had to play nice with his own Christians. So the Nestorian Christian, there wasn't the Nestorianism was a state religion in Persia. So on one hand, he allied with the Jews and allowed them into Jerusalem, but on the other hand, he could not go too far in Jerusalem with the Jews because his own Christian would get very angry. And so it is also, I think, one of the reasons why he he took over the Jews in 617 and stripped them of their rule over Jerusalem.
Yeah, the reason why he took the Holy Cross from Jerusalem as well was to please his wife and also please the Christian subjects.
Yeah, his Christian wife.
Yeah.
And also this way he could assert himself as being the true ruler over the Christians in regard to the Byzantine emperor. He had the true cross, he had Jerusalem, he had taken all of this from the Byzantine Empire. He was the big guy. So, but my point here was to say that after the Byzantines retook Jerusalem, the city was over forbidden to Jews. It was already forbidden to Jews before 614. It was all the more forbidden afterwards because of the massacres and enslavement that the Jews did on the Christians. And so it's an even more compelling reason to understand that Masjid al-Haram, in a Jewish perspective, could refer to Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. So the third, those are all the occurrences of the Masjid al-Haram in the Quran. But I want to go now to the third item, which is the bait. Bait in Arabic means house, but as I already told it, there is no word for temple in the Semitic languages, either Hebrew, Aramaic, or Arabic. And when one wants to refer to a temple in Arabic, he has to use the word bait. So he can use an expression to specifically refer to a temple. For example, there are many different bait expressions in the Quran, such as Beit al-Haram, the sacred house. So it obviously means the temple. Awal Beit, the first house. So the very first temple that was built. The Quran also presents features God as a locutor. God is speaking. He's supposed to be speaking in the Quran. So it's a rhetorical tactic to have God speak in a text. It's the same in the Bible. And we have the expression Beitiya, meaning my house, God speaking. So if God speaks of his own house, it means the temple of God. That we have also Beit al-Atiq, so the ancient house, so the ancient temple, and Beit al-Maqdis, the holy house, the holy temple. So we have a specific expression that tells us it's a temple and not just a house. We have 16 occurrences in the Quran of the word Beit as referring to a place of worship, so a temple. And these occurrences, when we study all of them, we have to ask the question, is the Beit in Jerusalem or in Mecca? First of all, when we look at all these occurrences, we see that it is the same place as Mecca, Kaaba, the place of the Hajj, and Umrah, and the Masjid al-Haram. So we already have strong hints that the Beit could be in Jerusalem. The temple in Jerusalem also matches every Quranic description that is made of the Beit. Everything you see here can be understood as the Jerusalem temple.
Can you pause a moment, Odon? Guys, I typically like to sort of go 2 hours, so we've got like 5 minutes. But Odon, on that point, there's the word mikrab, right, which comes from which comes from also from the Ethiopic. But Ptolemy calls the city Makoraba, right? But the significance, the context is mikrab or temple, right? And the name
You're
Makaraba
talking
means
about
temple.
mikrab or
Mikrab,
mihrab?
yeah.
How do you
The
spell
same thing because
mihrab?
H often becomes K in various languages. H and
Okay.
K are almost interchangeable. So the
But we have
name,
three occurrences of mihrab in the Quran.
yeah. So Makaraba means temple in numerous Semitic languages, and when Ptolemy speaks about Makaraba, right, he's speaking of it in the context of a mikrab or a temple. But don't forget, Makaraba also it's the Anglicization or the Latinization of the South Arabian Mukaraba, which is now referring again to Yemen, which is to the temples of Yemen, to the Kaaba of Yemen. So you got the South Arabian and the Ethiopian mikrab as temple, which in Islam now becomes a prayer niche, but it had originally the meaning of temple. I just thought to throw that in.
Yeah, I will just answer with Patricia Crone, 1985's book, Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. She has got an appendix on Ptolemy, where she explained that Ptolemy could not have referred to Mecca as being Makoraba. It's something else. It's not in the same location.
We can trace it to Mukaraba because we've traced the location. The location's been traced, and it is in Yemen, and it is exactly Al-Mahabisha.
Indeed.
And Muslims have changed the term mihrab. It used to be temple, now it's prayer niche. So they've made some play with the words there.
Mm-hmm.
Could I share with you just, let me see if I have it handy.
So we call it a day in 5 minutes. Is that okay, guys? Or
yeah,
as you want.
Yeah.
Just share this with you here.
Sure.
The Ugaritic Quraysh there. So here it would be the residence of the king.
Interesting.
So it has the meaning of tabernacle.
Very interesting. Yes.
You know, so there is. If I don't know if now Ugaritic is near
Canaan.
It's in Syria. It's like
border of the ocean, Syria on the ocean,
yeah.
Canaanite.
Yeah. So there is that has survived as a specific term for temple.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Quraysh, tabernacle. That's a very strong hint at the very minimum, Al.
Yeah.
Lloyd, let's just do one more item.
Sure.
Because we have done only three. Let's do the fourth one. It's very, very quick. It will be very quick since there are not many occurrences of the Kaaba expression. Literally, it means the cube, but in a derived meaning, it means the shrine. And we have many examples of the use of the word Kaaba in Arabic and Aramaic to describe shrines. So first of all, the Holy of Holies, which was shaped as a cube, but we have example of the Kaaba of Zoroaster in Iran, in modern day Iran.
Ethiopia as well.
Yeah, in Ethiopia there was also a Kaaba in Syria.
Yemen as well.
In Gall's map of Syria, of ancient Syria. And there is something interesting. There was a Mary's Kaaba in Jerusalem. Actually, it's Mary's tomb, and I've got a picture of it. So this is the Kaaba of Zoroaster. And in Jerusalem, here I have a map of Jerusalem in the early 7th century. And you see here the Church of Mary's tomb. And this tomb was shaped like a cube, a sort of cube. And it was it has been referred to as a Kaaba in a 6th century homily from a bishop of Jerusalem. So I won't say that it is the Kaaba of the Quran. I just want to pinpoint that Kaaba is a common word for shrine. And so nowadays, Kaaba has become a word, an expression that uniquely refers to the Kaaba of Mecca. But in the 7th century, there were many Kaabas,
Otherwise, yeah.
And the first, I think, the first meaning of the word was the Kaaba of the temple, meaning the holy of holy. And so again, as with every description that the Islamic narrative attributes to Mecca,
Yeah.
the Kaaba could refer to the Holy of Holy, and from there to Jerusalem's temple.
You've just shown Mary's. It's like basically a square with a dome on the one side, right, with a rounded side, correct?
It's a symbol.
Rectangle.
I've
Symbol.
got another book here.
Okay. It's a symbol of it. Okay.
Since I have unpacked my books, now I have some resources with another map, but I had to another map of the.
Your camera's frozen. You just restart your camera. Your camera's frozen, Odon.
Let me just unshare my screen. I think it will unfreeze it. Yeah. Is it working now?
You're still frozen. Just stop your camera and start your camera. Oh, there you're back. You're back.
Yeah, I'm back. Let me just check. I think it's in the 3rd volume. Yeah, it's here.
Yeah, I mean this last bit. I mean it's really interesting. There's parallels, overlaps. There's a lot to unpack and explore here, don't you think, Mel? There's a lot of avenues here.
Yeah, and there's a little bit more in terms of the Kaaba's meaning as well. There's a deeper meaning, which is actually to do with pregnancy. Okay, so
pregnancy. That's also the thing.
Robert Kerr makes that in a number of papers.
And I thought it referred to the shape of a young woman breast.
Maybe you're right. Actually, maybe it's that. Actually, yeah. I don't know why I thought it was pregnancy. You're right.
Here I have an interesting work from a French scholar, Bruno Bonnet-Aimard, who did a sort of precursor work to Luxembourg's. Mm-hmm. He translated the Quran on the basis of the text, but it's a strange work because it is both genius and garbage. He has some some genius affirmation, and also because of this method, sometimes it's completely far-fetched. But he provides this map. Just want to show it on the camera, where there is the location of Mary's Kaaba.
Yeah. Just pull it back slightly, Odon. Just a bit too much. Okay, there you go. Better focus. Now you got it. Hold it. Yeah, that's good.
In our next presentation, I put a picture of the map. And also of the reference to the bishop's homily, and so that's very interesting to highlight that many of the Meccan vocabulary is also found in Jerusalem or way up north in Syria. Mecca, the word Mecca, the Kaaba, and so on.
Mm.
You see, I was talking about collective memory.
Yeah,
there was a collective memory of the events of the 7th century among the Arab population. They remembered something about Mecca, about Kaabas, about Mahmad, about temples being built, and so on. And when the traditionists fabricated the Islamic narrative, they built upon these memories and twisted them and distorted them into a narrative that would be fit for justifying Islam as a new God-given religion.
Fair enough, and the lie is best built on some level of truth.
Yeah. That's how it works. This is what JC would concur to, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, so we call it a night for
Yes.
tonight. We pick this up in a week, guys. Yeah, so any comments before we go? But Mel, I mean, some great points. And then Odon, I mean, as counterpoints to what Odon is saying, I mean, Odon, this is really thought-provoking. And then Mel adds on things that you're like, man, that's really interesting, And then, of course, I say things that make you guys go, wow, right?
Mel, your microphone.
Mel, you're muted, yeah.
Yeah.
I think Odin's material is very good, and hopefully some of the points that I've given can be added to it to make it even stronger. But I think it's a great, rock solid case, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the opening slide.
Mel, you worked a lot on this. Also, you had Paul on your channel. The thing with what I'm doing, it's not groundbreaking since you already know most of it. But what I'm trying to do is to wrap everything together. And there are elements, some items that Paul Ellis didn't know. You see, everything comes together.
A great artist might be complimented, and he'd say, "Well, I just gathered the colors together,"
Yeah.
But okay, it's just gathering, but actually, it takes someone to bring it all together to make sense of it all. So that's what
credits must be given to Galles for this. He really did a tremendous work, but it was 21 years ago now, and it needs to be translated into English.
Right.
Okay.
Look, I think there's a lot of old scholarship that has been neglected, but I think all of us are collectively starting to look at it and bring it up. I mean, I've revived some stuff that goes back centuries that's just been sitting in archives. And we're starting to find that a lot of old scholars, 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, they knew this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
there's old archaeology from the 20s to the 50s, 60s that we need to go look at that shows things about Islam and Arabia that, has been forgotten or suppressed, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah.
The thing that is very strange is that most of it has been willingly forgotten. There was something very strange in the 20th century around starting from the years 30 up to Patricia Crone and
oil money. Saudi Arabia, oil money.
maybe. But it began before, even before they found more oil in Saudi Arabia.
But that there were certain people involved, like say, I mean, with the Brits, with some of the foreign affairs people, or even people in intelligence that converted to Islam and became sympathetic. CIA, MI6. I mean, there are those cases, and so they started to. I mean, there's some odd conversions that you don't know much about, that they don't talk about, even in the US. There's some odd conversions that don't make the news. Let's say
it was even within the church. I'm referring here to the way Henri Lamince was a groundbreaking Belgian scholar. He lived in Syria, and he was one of the first to understand that the whole Islamic narrative is a fabrication based on the Quran. And he wrote articles about this, Quran and tradition, Fatima and the daughters of the Prophet.
Yeah.
And he was a Jesuit. And I think around 1920 or 1924, his superiors ordered him to stop his research on early Islam because it was inconvenient for them. And so instead, he studied Muslim sociology, anthropology. He did an interesting work, but he wasted his talent.
This is worth looking into. Yeah, Mel?
Just one final comment is, if the Saudis were convinced that there was any at all artifacts from the 7th century under Mecca, they would be digging for it because they are eager to boost their tourism into Arabia to divest themselves from oil. So the fact that they're not doing that is a clear sign they know the game is up and there's nothing there.
They know. I'm sure they
Yes,
know.
I agree with that. But another thing, if I was them, I would have gotten some artifacts from other places, many decades ago, and I would have said that they were from Mecca. I wonder why they
Fraud.
never
They'd be caught
thought.
for fraud. No, they'd be.
Well, they destroy a lot of stuff and so on. So I just wonder why they didn't have things appearing magically out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Well,
One
No,
of
they'd
them.
be
they have a
bombing
museum.
things.
They do
They
have a
will
museum
literally.
of junk. They do have
Yeah.
a museum of junk in Istanbul, claiming to be
Yeah.
to have the sandals of Muhammad and so forth. But they,
I mean,
As the
why did they
president,
bomb the museum in Al Mahabisha in Yemen, which had all of these artifacts, which kind of disproves the Islamic narrative? Why did they drop 2 bombs on it from an F-16? You got to ask yourself.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So,
showing
guys,
a
we call it
mistake.
a night here. We pick this up next week. But Odon, you sold me your first opening slide. Sold me. I mean, you cannot refute that.
It's physical evidence, blatant evidence. But
Yeah.
the thing is that this evidence is not evidence enough for Muslim because of this wrong syllogism of the absence of evidence is not the proof of absence. So you have to provide real evidence that there was nothing in Mecca because everything is about Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is very, very compelling. If one understands that the Quran does not talk about Mecca, but instead it talks about Jerusalem, there is nothing left for Mecca. And this false claim of the absence of evidence cannot stand anymore.
Yeah. No, fair enough. And it fits a different location. I mean, that's true. So, guys, we call it a night here. Then we'll pick it up in a week. But fascinating. Mel, Odon, I mean, fascinating information. Really. I mean, wow. It's all converging and it's fantastic. Yeah. So thank you all. And then thanks to the audience. God bless, guys. And we'll see you all in soon.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Good night.